Hi, welcome to another batch of classic bookmarks. A couple of years ago, we realized that we had been producing Bookmark for 30 years, some 425 episodes. To celebrate, we chose 15 shows to enhance and broadcast. The reception has been terrific. Viewers got a real kick out of seeing or re-seeing the conversations with Toni Morrison, Ray Bradbury, William Styron, Alexander McCall Smith, and many others. So, we have chosen another 15 shows from the archives. Interviews with George Saunders, Margaret Atwood, E.O. Wilson, Walter Mosley, Albert Murray, James Haskins, and 9 others. Of course, we are continuing to produce new shows with new writers and old writer friends. But in the meantime, we hope you enjoy watching these classics as much as we enjoyed making them. Hi, welcome to Bookmark. I'm your host, Don Noble. Today's guest is Jon Meacham, who has written of the relationship between giants, Winston Churchill and Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and biographies of Thomas Jefferson and Andrew Jackson. His American Lion, Andrew Jackson in the White House, won the Pulitzer Prize. Now he has completed his biography of George H.W. Bush, our 41st president, who is still very much alive and whose place in history has yet to be decided. Please join me at the Alabama Booksmith as I talk with biographer Jon Meacham. Mr. Meacham, it's a pleasure to see you.
Delighted to be here.
I've been reading your work for years. I'm a fan.
You're the one.
Yes, it's a pleasure to meet you in person.
Thank you.
The newest book, the biography of George H.W. Bush, came out a few weeks ago, and the ink was still wet, and you were being interviewed on Sunday morning and other kinds of news and talk shows. And I watched it, and I had this strong impression, one, that the people speaking with you had not yet read your book, except for 3 or 4 pages towards the end, pages 585, 586, and 587, where Bush 41 said a few things characterizing his son's presidency, his opinion of Dick Cheney, and his present long-lasting opinion of Donald Rumsfeld.
That's right.
Let's just put that behind us.
Sure.
What did George H.W. have to say about those 3 things?
The president was worried that his son's administration was too swaggering, that there was a cowboy image, that the president was ultimately responsible for it, but in 41's view, Rumsfeld and Cheney exacerbated it. Everyone was a grown-up in it. President Bush made these comments, breaking years of silence about his son's administration. When I took them to 43, he said, well, my rhetoric was hot, but they understood me in Midland, which I thought was a good response.
And true.
And true. It had the virtue of being true. Cheney said, yes, I was different after September 11th because the strategic environment had changed. Rumsfeld chose not to comment on the record. You're right. It was but one of the funny things, when President Bush first made those remarks in October of 2008, it was a Monday morning interview, I remember, I knew in that moment that I would spend the first 3 days of whenever this book was published talking about those comments. So,
yes, and the book coming out in the frenzy of the primary season here.
Right.
I mean, it's just perfect.
Yeah, well, yeah, gas on the flames there. But the book, yeah, as you implicit in your question, is this? I really wanted President Bush to have his moment here, have a full dress life, because I think it's a great American life that is very little understood.
It is a slice of Americana, but it's as with some presidents, it's a very high-end slice.
Very privileged slice.
Very
yes,
privileged
yes.
slice.
It's like FDR. It's like JFK. More like culturally and temperamentally, he has a great deal in common with the founding presidents who were Virginia planters in many ways, for whom the making of a living was not a central concern, which gave you the ability, the free space to treat public service as part of your ambient responsibility. And so there was never any doubt, really, but that Poppy Bush, as he was known as a child, was going to do something involving public service.
You have written about Franklin Roosevelt. I love the Franklin Roosevelt, Winston Churchill friendship. I think that's just...
I miss the boys. It was fun.
It's really nice. And Jefferson and Jackson. And in a way, these are very different people. But they're all President of the United States. So they all obviously had powers and capabilities of leadership. The same ones. Here you are with 4 presidents.
Yeah.
What do they have in common? And how is Bush the same or different from Jackson, say?
Well, what they have in common is the perennial tension between ambition, appetite, versus service and duty. Mm-hmm. And it's a matrix, it's all, they're all mixed together. It's not a Manichaean struggle for any of them, which is why it's fascinating. Very few, there are some figures for whom that is a Manichaean struggle, but these men, it's not. They also all wanted to leave the country in a better place than they found it, and they wanted to leave their thumbprint on the country. So they wanted to improve it, but they wanted it to be clear who had done the improving. And so, as I said to President Bush once, what drove you? He said, service. I said, that's fine, sir, but you could have opened a soup kitchen. You didn't have to seek ultimate responsibility in a nuclear age to serve. And he acknowledged that, and acknowledged that he was a very driven man. It had come from his childhood. His mother was fiercely competitive. She once broke her wrist playing tennis and finished the match and won. These were tough people, the Bushes and the Walkers. But Jackson, Jefferson, Roosevelt, Bush were all quintessentially political creatures. They were those who required, in their very heart and soul, they required a large stage on which to act out what they thought was their destiny.
Yeah. And for some of them, they had lineage to start off their destiny. I was astonished. The Bushes were Mayflower people. Yep. The Walkers were 17th century people. Yep. Yep. And then Barbara Pierce's family was almost as distinguished and richer in some ways than the Walkers and the Bushes. Those ancestors of George H.W., Episcopalian priest, bankers, man who owned an iron factory, industrialists, and of course his father. Now, what his father was the senator from Connecticut at one point. Is that the real direct link?
Well, I think so. Prescott Bush, who was the son of the president of Buckeye Steel Castings, had grown up in Columbus, Ohio, had come east to school, St. George's and Yale, was really kind of an early private equity guy. Brown Brothers Harriman, a private bank. But the thing that really gave him a lot of joy was being the moderator of the Greenwich Town Meeting. And so that's where it all began. Right. That's where it all began. And ultimately, he became senator. He lost his first race. It's funny, they wanted to know if he wanted to run for the House, and he went to his Brown Brothers partners, and they considered being a partner at Brown Brothers Harriman to be more influential in the world than being a member of the House of Representatives, which gives you some sense of their own self-regard about privilege. But it was about, it was in many ways about his dad. His father first ran in 1950, won in 52. And Bush, George H.W. Bush, by the time he was 40, was running for the U.S. Senate in Texas. Yeah. Before he was 40, 39.
His childhood, I mean, it's lovely, it's enviable.
Yes. His sister told me, his sister said, unimaginable now. Unimaginable now.
I guess. There's still a Phillips Andover, there's still Choate, people still go.
But the servants who would show up at the hunting lodge and light the fires and all of that. But I do think he took away a Rooseveltian sense of to whom much is given, much is expected. They were not spoiled. They were privileged, but they were not entitled, they were not spoiled. And when you think about the demographics of that family, it's remarkable that from generation to generation, these have been whole people. They haven't been reckless when you think about it.
Right. Duty, honor, country. He finishes prep school, turns 18, and joins the Navy.
On the same day.
Yes, wonderful, just wonderful. Putting off his inevitable time at Yale.
Right, exactly, yes.
The way I'd like to frame this is, in the course of his political career, there's a period of time when he's accused of being a swaggerer. Then there's a period of time when he's accused of being a wimp.
Right.
Then there's another period of time when he's running against Dukakis, where he's again the cowboy,
right.
the big guy from the West, and Dukakis is somehow cast as an elitist from the Northeast.
Right.
Well, they're going to be a bigger elitist from the Northeast than
George Bush.
But his World War II experiences, I mean, he was a remarkable young man.
He was. By the time he was probably the youngest flying officer in the Navy.
Yeah.
That's something that's always been said of him. He on September 2nd, 1944, he was shot down over the Pacific. He finished a mission even after his plane had been hit. The wings of the plane went up in flames, the cockpit filled with smoke. He took out the tower he was supposed to take out, goes back out to sea. He loses his two crewmates, Del Delaney and Ted White were their names. He plunges deep into the Pacific. He's almost decapitated coming out of the plane. He's out there for 4 hours waiting for a submarine to pick him up. If the wind and the tide had been going toward Chichijima as opposed to away from it, he would have become a Japanese prisoner of war on an island where war crimes were particularly horrific, including cannibalism. So at various moments through the years, Bush has said, well, you know, I was almost an hors d'oeuvre. It's
I never heard that.
At 20 years old, all that. And then the other tragedy that I think shaped him, so that happens when he's 20. By the time he's 33, 32, they lose their daughter to leukemia. And so when I asked him about what all this had taught him, he just had a much more a keener appreciation of the fragility of life and death than most of us do, and a much deeper emotional complexity than most of us do. And he said that particularly what his daughter's death had taught him was that life was unpredictable and fragile.
It is touching in your biography that it's very clear, not only did he never get over it, but it becomes almost a George Patton kind of mystical experience. He imagines, I don't mean dreams it, but she's present.
Yes.
She's a kind of a spiritual presence from
Yes.
time to time.
Yes. That's the way he
daughter.
coped. Yes, Robin. That's the way she died at the age of 4. And the way the president coped was to imagine her at different ages, at different stages of life. They'll be buried with her in College Station at the President's Library. They reinterred her remains from Greenwich some years ago. And it fundamentally shaped the family, and I think it had a great deal to do with Bush's hectic, frenetic, headlong pace. Life could be taken away at any point, so there wasn't a moment to waste.
And now he's 91 or 2.
91 and a half years old. 91 and a half, and still going. You know, did the coin toss of the NFL game in Houston the other day.
Right. When the war ends, he comes out. Then he goes to Yale. Skull and Bones, Phi Beta Kappa, 2.5 years.
Yep.
It's almost. You made it perfectly clear many times that this is a man in a hurry.
Yeah.
But I swear, if I had been a Bush at Yale, I wouldn't have been in such a rush.
Rush to get into the real world. No, that's true. But imagine piloting. I mean, he was a carrier-based pilot at that age. That was in the dawn of that kind of aviation, and he just wanted to get a family going. That generation, as his son once put it, I think in his acceptance speech in 2000, that his father was part of the generation that came home and put their medals in a drawer and went to work. And in summer of 1948, he strikes out for Texas to make his own fortune. He has an immense support from his family, but he still had to make his own payrolls, find the oil. So George Bush always benefited from being George Bush. There's no question about that. But within that context, he took extraordinary risks to get himself out of the comfort zone of the Northeast.
And he lived purposely, modestly, when he went out to Odessa and to Midland. I love the little bit where he and Barbara and George W. are sharing a kind of a duplex house with a mother-daughter prostitute team.
Yes.
And they share the bathroom.
They share the bathroom, and then sometimes the gentleman callers would leave the bathroom door locked, which so they were exposed to the entrepreneurial class early. Is one way.
The mother and daughter.
Yes, exactly.
I read that paragraph twice. I swear. I thought this
can't be true.
mother-daughter, really? And Barbara Bush is sharing a bathroom with two hookers.
Yeah, there you go.
So to speak.
There you go.
Would it be offensive to say that this is a kind of willful? He had plenty of money, or he could have had plenty of money, but he is determined to live like a common fellow who just finished college on the GI Bill.
Well, he wanted to make it on his own. I think that love was unconditional in the Bush family, but respect was earned, admiration was earned,
right.
And so you wanted to win the tennis match, you wanted to win the golf tournament. It wasn't that it was brutal, but the whole ethos of the family has this kind of muscular Christianity idea that athletics, business success, these are all, one's success in the world is in fact a measure, into some sense, some degree of character. And so he wanted, as he said, we came to Texas because we wanted to make a lot of money quick. He didn't want to go to Wall Street. He would have been in the shadow of his father and his grandfather. I mean, George Herbert Walker Bush, G.H. Walker and Company was one of the jobs on offer. He writes a letter to one of his buddies saying that he doesn't want to take advantage of the fact that he knows everybody from the debutante parties and go raise money from them. That he just saw that as a conventional path that was not going to be challenging enough. He once said it wasn't different. His big left hand. It wasn't different enough. It wasn't different enough. And he wanted something different. And one of the things, an overall familial point, is that the Bushes we talk about and know about, and the Walkers we talk about and know about, are not those who took a conventional path, but those who took an unconventional path. G.H. Walker broke with his father's business, a dry goods business in St. Louis. Samuel Prescott Bush, who ran Buckeye Steel, his father had been a priest. He wanted to get out of the world of the scholarship and theology. And George H.W. Bush wanted to make it on his own so that Prescott Bush would look at him with respectful eyes.
In a lot of a lot of biographies of famous and powerful men, but especially in the biographies you've written, Daddy figures large.
Yeah.
Winston's daddy, Franklin's daddy, George H.W.'s father. Fathers really matter.
They absolutely. And in fact, I once interviewed President Obama about this very question because presidents tend to either have a dominant father figure or no father at all. There's almost no in between. So if you think about recent history, Barack Obama and Bill Clinton both were without fathers. George W. Bush and George H.W. Bush both had powerful fathers. So the last four presidents, you can tell this story. President Reagan had a unreliable father, an alcoholic. And President Obama said that he always thought that sons are always either trying to live up to their father's expectations or make up for their father's mistakes.
Which is Bill Clinton doing?
Well, he's probably doing both, as ever. He's got a big appetite. So,
Bush's years as head of the National Republican Committee, envoy to China, head of the CIA, then 8 years as vice president. It's like he's the crown prince or something, waiting and waiting and waiting for the moment to come. And it finally does come, but I got the sense that there was a terrific tension. He was loyal, kept his mouth shut, followed the party line. Must have been excruciating for somebody who wanted to be...
You wanted to be in charge. Yeah.
Really in charge of everything. I mean, he was in charge of the CIA. He was, but...
Well,
stressful.
It was stressful. I think of those years as almost a second military career for him, where he was going from posting to posting and sort of preparing for command. Now, as you know, there was a was touch and go always. There was no guarantee that there was going to be the next job, right. And in fact, he very nearly did not become vice president. If Reagan and Ford could have struck their deal, which would have put Ford on the ticket in 1980, then there would have been no Bush vice presidency, and there would have been no Bush presidency.
Right. It was the 8 years of loyalty,
of absolute loyalty to Reagan,
right?
And also a very shrewd campaign in 1988 that was uncharacteristic of him in terms of his, he is a gentlemanly, gracious figure, but he did not always run in a gentlemanly and gracious way.
Lee Atwater, who he really repented and recanted and wrote a book and said he was sorry.
Well, he told Life magazine he was sorry. Yeah.
Was it Life magazine?
Yeah.
I mean, he after he had a brain tumor and he was dying.
Yep.
And there's several moments in your life of Bush where this man of enormous sense of personal honor is willing to get his hands dirty.
Sure.
With campaign dirty tricks, and you I wouldn't say that that the pages vibrate or anything, but you struggled with this element in his character, that this supremely honorable father, husband, statesman would do that.
Sure. Well, but no great political life is without those shadows. If you're looking for a great political life without those, you'll end up in the realm of fiction pretty fast. I think at critical moments, Iran-Contra, the conduct of the AA campaign, he made compromises and capitulations and in some questions of party orthodoxy, to win power in order to have the capacity to do what he was best at, which was to act with power. Right. And so my test, I guess, of a great political life is less what you do to win it and more what you do with it.
Right. Well, that was his test for sure.
Yeah, and but I think it's a fair one because I think in a fallen world, there's no other way to do it. Or, as Robert Penn Warren taught us, there's always something. There's always something. And if you're looking for perfection, if you're looking for a totally noble figure, I think you'll look in vain.
His presidency, 4 years. Actually, I get the strong impression from you that he was just as glad in some ways that it was 4 and not 8. It seemed like he was really tired.
He was tired. He was suffering from Graves' disease, a thyroid condition that was difficult. Didn't affect his fitness for office, but it affected his energy levels. And he'd been running flat out since World War II.
Since he was 18.
Yes, so
no one had a right to be tired.
Yeah, Jim Baker told me, he said, we were all tired.
Of course.
8 years as vice president, 4 years as president. I mean, the end of the Cold War.
A lot of Americans, I think I include myself. It's hard to remember exactly, but I had an impression. I would have, if someone had asked me 6 months ago about the Bush presidency, I might have said not much happened.
Mm-hmm.
But the USSR folded, the Berlin Wall came down, Germany was reunified, the coup plotters staged their uprising in Moscow.
Mm-hmm.
It was
First Gulf War.
And he ran and won Desert Shield and Desert Storm.
Mm-hmm.
It was a lot.
It was 8 years of action packed into 4.
It was, wasn't it?
Uh-huh. And
then all these things successfully, in some cases brilliantly managed, and he loses re-election.
Well, he knew instantly, the height of his popularity at the Gulf War, in the flush of that victory, that the election would be about the economy. He was ahead of the pundits. He was ahead of his own people. There was it was not a deep recession, but it was an anemic recovery. And he was living on borrowed historical time anyway. We had not had 12 years of one-party White House rule since Roosevelt and Truman. So 8 on, 8 off was the norm.
Right. And
so the victory in '88 was anomalous. He was the first sitting vice president since Martin Van Buren to succeed a sitting president. So to have gone 16 years, 4 national elections in a row would have meant that Reagan and Bush were of a political caliber with Roosevelt and Truman. and which was 5 elections. And I respect President Reagan and President Bush enormously, but that was a different time. So I think there's a tide in the affairs of men, and I think that it was time for a party switch there, and it opened up the next chapter for the Bush family. I don't think either Bush brother could have run for governor while their father was president. There would have been a kind of conflict. Every day would have been trying to get the governors to
say something about the president and vice versa.
Exactly.
I think that his accomplishments there, I had to be reminded of them, and it was prudence that saw him through.
It was.
It was his equanimity, his calm.
Steady as she goes. And in this climate, as we look at a 2016 field that's about as different from the 1988 field as you can imagine. We've gone from, in 1988 and 1992, a Republican nominee who had a hard time speaking about himself to a front runner in 2016 who can talk about little else. So it's a little like what Henry Adams said about Washington to Grant disproved Darwin. I have a feeling that's what we're seeing right now.
I am astonished by what we see right now, and tonight is another debate, and we will see something else. I'm going to take it as certain that you're not writing a biography of Donald Trump, but
at the moment, I never say never. One supposes.
But I also take it as certain that you are writing another book. What are you doing now?
Well, I'm under spousal orders not to decide until the new year.
Oh,
which I figure is cheaper than a divorce. So waiting, don't you think?
You're deciding between what and what?
I've thought about President Eisenhower. I've thought about President Lincoln in the broad political career. So there are possibilities. I'm doing my reading, and we'll decide sometime early in the year.
And I won't ask you who's going to win the nominations or the presidency, but I will ask you about George H.W. From his present position, ranked among presidents, do you think that position in the near future will rise? Will people think more of him soon than they do at present?
I do. I think he's a consequential president. I think the case I make has gotten some attention, and I think has, I hope, helped shape a burgeoning historical conversation about him. I think he will go down as one of the 2 most consequential one-term presidents, with James K. Polk. And arguably, in many ways, as important. Again, presidents don't always get the credit they deserve for keeping bad things from happening, and to have ended the Cold War without firing a shot is a remarkable achievement. And if that's what, if Bill Clinton's right that you only get remembered for at best 2 or 3 things, George Bush won the first Gulf War, broke Read My Lips, and ended the Cold War, and so that's. I'd take that.
That's the nice thing about these kinds of predictions. We'll all live long enough to see.
Well, as John Maynard Keynes said, in the long run, we'll all be dead.
There is that also. I've enjoyed this conversation so much. And when you do decide, and when you do write the next one, I hope you come back, and I hope we can sit down and talk again.
I'd love to. Love being here.
Been a pleasure.
Thanks, Tom.